that why don't I like being described as a composer? I suppose it comes from the time when actually being a composer was somewhat risque in society's terms, because everyone assumed what happened in English music, British music, but English music particularly after the war, Second World War, was that it was introspective, romantic. But meanwhile, in Germany and Austria and France, there'd been and Italy too, to some extent, there'd been an absolutely amazing revolution happening with, a very new, to some people, very disturbing kind of music was born. And so if you were, as I was, brought up at that age when everyone was expecting you not to write English cowpat music, or lying in a bath watching your own navel and writing crotchets around it, which is what some critics said. That was what was wrong with English music. It was too conservative, too introspective. To call yourself a composer anyway would inevitably lead to a question. I had a composer friend who is now dead, but who lived in Liverpool, and I remember him being interviewed on a local television programme, and someone said to him, how does it feel being a modern music composer? He said, terrible. And they said, why is that? He said, well, because, he said, I'll give you an example. He said, I went to a party once, and people were saying, going around asking people, what do you do? And then somebody came to me and said, what do you do? So I said, well, I'm a composer. Oh, really? What kind of music do you write? So I said, well, sort of modern music. Oh, my God, you're not one of these composers who does stuff like cats walking up and down the keyboard or something accidentally dropping on top of an instrument, are you? So I said, well, do you write tunes? Nice chords? No. Nice rhythms that I can dance to? No. So I decided, that's it. I'm not going to say I'm a composer ever again. And I decided, this has actually happened on television, I decided next time somebody asked me what I did, I was going to tell them I trained lions as a lion trainer. So he said, that's what I'm going to do. No reaction. Anyway, funnily enough, about 6 months later, he was on a radio programme, a local Liverpool radio. He was a Liverpudlian composer. And he told this story that he'd said on a television interview that, he was fed up with being accused of writing horrible modern music, and he was going to tell people that he was a lion tamer. He said he went to a dinner by the Law Society in England, which composers sometimes do, he was invited, and some guy who was obviously like a judge or something came up to him and said, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. What is it? He said, my name's called Hugh Wood. I see. What do you do? I train lions. Really? African or Indian lions? He said, I suddenly thought, you're not one of these people who uses cattle progs or electric stuff like that to train. He said, I might as well have told him I was a composer because he would have had the same reaction. So if you ask me, originally, I didn't like the idea of being branded a composer, I suppose because you felt defensive about it. And, it does inevitably ask, if even today, if someone says, what do you do? And you tell them you're a composer, the first question, guess what? What kind of music is it?
Always.
And it's almost impossible to answer, in words, to answer what kind of music you write. So it's the labels bit I don't like. When you go to conferences, I used to be an academic, as you might know, and you always had to wear a little label saying which university you were from and what your name is and what discipline you did. Well, actually, the whole word discipline smacks of kind of, I don't know, six of the best or something. It's this whole idea that if you give a label to yourself, then it shuts you down from being thought of as a bigger, broader, richer sort of person. Arnold Schoenberg, who was a sort of father of a lot of what happened in 20th century new music, was once asked what a composer does. He said, a composer is manipulating sound out of silence in a strategic fashion. So does that make it clear? Do you understand that? No. What do composers do? They play with sound, they organise sound, but it's not a mechanical process, and it certainly isn't one where just a label alone, I am a composer, would do. Because I think people are quite right to say, well, okay, what sort of composer are you? Do you write jazz? Do you write pop music? Do you write film music? And they're all different. So then you start saying, it's like, the current wokeisms about, whether you're called Mr. or Mrs. or Ms. or it or they or whatever, all these different labels for gender. It's confusing. Look, I'm an experimenter with sound. I'm an adventurer with sound. I mean, if somebody says they're an explorer, you say, well, what do you do? I'm an explorer. Oh, yeah, what do you explore? Well, mountains. That's it, People have got the whole idea of going up Everest. They see snowy peaks, dangerous cliff falls and whatever, the whole thing. When you say you're a composer, unless you read music, unless you've been trained in music, you're not really going to know what it means anyway.
What would you say instead of you're a composer?
Well, the Aboriginals have a very interesting expression about they don't have the word art in their vocabulary. So the word artist doesn't exist in Aboriginal society. Do you know what they call themselves? Dream shapers. That's the way it translates. Now, I wouldn't say that my music is the music of dreams, getting close to Shakespeare, but well, I mean, no, come on, I mentioned Shakespeare. No, he said, I can't remember, it was As You Like It, I think, if music be the food of love, play on. So that sounds like a very mixed up sort of thing. Music as a food, be the food and of love, define love, define music. They're difficult. And I suppose the important thing for me is that I'm constantly thinking of new ways of expressing myself. So, my God, can I find a label? No, I can't find a label. And in fact, when I'm working on different kinds of pieces, I'm probably a different kind of person. So if I'm writing a piece for, like this one, which I'm writing for clarinet and piano, well, then I'm a clarinet and piano composer, and you're thinking completely differently. If I was writing for my piano here, it's one instrument, I play it, so I know it really well. If I'm writing for clarinet and piano, as I've already explained, I don't know the clarinet so well. So I'm already a different kind of composer. If I'm writing for a massive symphony orchestra, at least half of the instruments of which I don't know how to play at all, or virtually don't know how to play, I'm another kind of composer. Your good composing should be dangerous. You should feel. My ideal state as a composer is a sense of strangeness, somewhere new, vulnerable, threatened in some ways, because the ideas that you get in your head. Because this is a hard one. We talked about everyone can hear the sound of a dog and their loved ones' voices and so on. What I hear are often dismembered sounds. They don't necessarily relate to a piece. They're just sounds. Sometimes it's quite specific what the instruments are. Sometimes it's just voices, human voices. But I hear sounds, and they're sort of floating in a kind of nether space inside my mind. And you have to catch them. They're floating about, but they have no particular purpose. They're just there. They're something you've heard as a result of being inspired by an amazing beach, an amazing wave, an amazing cloud formation, a fantastic piece of birdsong, a chorus of insects, something like that. The sound of your lover's voice, anything can get you going. And these sounds appear, but they're not. Those sounds do not exist in that space, as it were, composed. They're there to be caught.
So do you catch them and then do you control them, or do you paint a picture with them, or what's their purpose when you take them from that echo chamber in your head and put them down?
You apply them. They appear as colours do on the palette of an oil painter or a watercolour painter. And you tip the brush of your imagination, the brush of your intelligence, and you draw out the colour I'm talking about the notes, of course, that you want, to apply it and see if, as a result of taking it from this rather free, floating, beautiful, improvisatory, almost jazz-like space, because it doesn't care about being organised, but you want to organise it because you want to say something. You feel emotional about it. You draw it out of the head and you bring it into your pen, into your hands, down your arm, into your pencil, and onto the manuscript paper. And it's instantly relocated. And the trick for me, actually, is I love the idea of composing, not having too much mediation, of interference between the process of hearing and the process of writing it down. If you start thinking, it's bad news. There's a lovely film called Finding Forrester. It's Sean Connery and a great young black actor who's he's still a school kid, and he's aspiring to be a writer. In fact, he's obviously very gifted. And it turns out that the Sean Connery character is a once-off famous writer who wrote a magnificent once-off novel, then he didn't do anything else. He befriends this kid, and at one point he says to him, "So you want to be a writer?" So he said, "Yes, I do." So he brings in 2 typewriters there at the desk, and another typewriter on the opposite side of the table. And he says to the kid, right. So and he starts like this, doing it like this, and the kid's just staring. And he keeps writing, and the kid's just... And then Sean kind of goes, shh, turns a piece of paper over and says, "Read that." So this bloke, gee, he said, "That's amazing." He said, "Okay, right." He starts typing again, and the kid's still staring. And Sean Connery stops. He said, "What are you doing?" And the guy said, "I'm thinking." "Don't think! Don't think! I said write, not think. If I wanted you to think, I wouldn't give you a typewriter." So it's... Of course, this is food for critics, because they say, when my pieces were first done, they described my music as chaotic, disorganised, rambling, unfocused. These are the sort of common criticisms. They also used the word complicated, which meant I don't understand it, but it's obviously modern music, so I'm going to say complicated, because that gives me an excuse to say it's rubbish. Because if it's complicated, no one's going to understand it, so you're just up your own backside with intelligence, and it doesn't apply to anybody.
That's like the easy way out, isn't
it? It's an easy way out. But I do rely on an innate... This is really important. Your question's a very interesting one. I rely on an innate knowledge of what is right to do with sound. And that's not something you learn from music lessons or from playing the piano or the violin or from being taught composition. It's something you learn from nature. And when we talked earlier on about my childhood, about drawing sounds, not knowing how to write music down, what was I doing? I was practicing how to relate to forms and ideas and shapes of things. Very few people go through life actually thinking about how fast something is or how slow something is. If you say to somebody, "Is there anything interesting about drinking a cup of tea?" If you're a composer and you're thinking about time and things shaped in time, it certainly is. You both have a marketing business involving coffee. Now, you must have watched dozens of scores, hundreds of people drinking coffee. So they have a cup. Let's supposing this is the cup, and you want to learn something from it. Now you get your people who are absolutely in control of what they're doing. Pick the cup up straight away. Don't smell it. Just take a sip. And put the cup down again. So you say, well, what? How do you represent that as an idea? Well, it's just straightforward. So you have a set of notes, if you translate it into music, a set of notes which proceed without any complexity. It's just simply a slide upwards, and that's it, finished. On the other hand, you can get somebody who picks up a cup and doesn't even drink. They have a look at it. And they may even get 2 hands looking at it, so you have a completely different pose. This is just drinking a cup of coffee, don't forget. And so already this is interesting. What's this person doing? And then they look into the cup and they maybe do it a bit around. Maybe they'll go, and then they don't even drink at all. They put it back down again. Now this starts to become like a play. This is a piece of theatre that you're watching here. This is poetry in motion. This is not just a utilitarian drinking of a cup. This is using the cup and the coffee as an art object. It's something to invent with, to play with, and so on. So there's nothing from which you can't learn about things like how fast, how slow, how complicated, how simple, how loud, how soft. We human beings don't realise what fantastic composers we are. I think you came to a talk where I was illustrating how when you're meeting a person for the first time, and especially if you're a man and you're a heterosexual, it's a very attractive lady, and you want to attract her attention, the first sounds that you make can be crucial to forming a working relationship with that person. So, you will not go to that person and shout at them, "Hello!" And I've composed that sound. I've changed the colour of my voice. I can change the colour of my voice amazingly just using one note. Now, if you took that in little slices of sound, there's probably 30 different sounds in there, 30 different colours of sound with my own voice. When people say, could I have a ham and lettuce sandwich, please? They're composing sounds. Because, and they're making the sounds appropriate to the acquisition of a piece of bread with ham and lettuce inside it. And they have to do it appropriately. Could I have a ham and dog sandwich, please? Could I have a ham and electric light bulb sandwich, please? You've composed it, but it's not relevant to what you want to do. So a composer is, if he or she is true to their emotions, and they must play a part in composing. I've been accused sometimes of writing beautiful music, but not emotional music. But probably by people who don't get emotional about sunsets, or about the shape of an orchid, or about a bee flying backwards, or about a dragonfly taking off and the sound of its wings zipping past your ear. They probably don't get excited by things like that. I get very emotional about nature. And if you simply let your emotions run riot without any shape to them, it's going to be meaningless. Everything we do to try and communicate with other people has shapes. And we have choices. So many different kinds of choices. I want to be different. I don't want to sound like other composers. I want my music to sound like I did it, I found it, I did this. It's the Sinatra thing, I did it my way. I mean, it's that. What does that song mean? That you're selfish and you don't care about anybody else? Or that you might have, don't we all ask this big question, why am I here? When I was a kid, I never asked that question about why I was there. I just, you weren't self-conscious enough to actually to ask a question like, why am I here? What's the meaning of life? I asked big questions about why things around me were there. Very big questions. Why are those trees by the side of this river? Why are these big willow trees growing in the middle of that field over there? Why is it that when you put a big rock in the middle of this moving water, it makes a pattern, the water divides around it and it comes out the other side with all these curly patterns? Why doesn't it come out straight at the other side? I mean, I was 4, 5, 6-year-old asking those questions. What was I doing? I was interrogating form. I was actually investigating the dynamics of life, from which everything I've composed well, and it hasn't always been well, and it hasn't always been good, and it hasn't always been composed, it hasn't always been effective, it hasn't always been genuine, it hasn't always been authentic. But when I've done it well, I'm in a state of oneness with nature. And if my music is getting better, and I think it is, and getting stronger, it's getting stronger by an evolutionary process which is guided by the evolution of nature itself. Trial and error, survival of the fittest. Natural is a beauty. I love it. I love it. You know, Darwin's evolutionary theory based on natural selection. I wish I'd said that when you first asked me the question about what I do with the notes in my head. That's the answer. Natural selection. They're all evolving. If I don't, quite often when I go to bed, before I go to bed, I have to take note of what I've done during the day. Because I know that when I'm asleep, when I'm unconscious, the process of composing is going to go on. I've dreamt pieces in my sleep, whole pieces. Or I've gone to bed with a problem and woken up with a solution. You know, you've gone to bed with these sounds and you think, what the hell am I going to do with those? You know, and you could lie awake for ages thinking, oh, try this. No, I'll give it to the clarinet. No, don't do that. You can slow it down. Give it to the second violin. No, that won't work. Well, you give it to the cellos. What? No, stop. You know, you go to sleep, somehow you wake up and the answer's already there.
When you're asleep, you're not thinking. Maybe that's...
Well, you are, you know.
Oh,
you are. No, that's the interesting thing. I mean, what is thinking? What is thinking? But, you know, what is composing? I say, well, what is thinking? Composing is a form of thinking. It's a form of feeling, and it's a form of feeling about thoughts and thinking about feelings. And it's the byplay between thought and feeling that gives you the repertoire of possibility that composing can be. And my life has just been so rich in terms of the palette of possibility of effects and colours of sound and shapes of sound and big things and little things, in-your-face things, hidden things, that, I never run out of ideas. My composing teacher, who I think has had a somewhat jaundiced view of me as one of his students, has used to say about my music, you're never short of ideas, by which he actually meant you don't know what to do with them. It was pretty clear that he thought I wasn't doing things properly. On the wall there you have some of his sketches where he's doing every single pernickety, finickety, precise note manipulation going on, you know, line after line after line, to produce what? A cerebrally, a intellectually justifiably well-wrought and well-structured piece of music, as though it were jewellery, as though you were constructing a suspension bridge, as though you were trying to make an elaborate geodesic dome using numbers and mathematics. It might be beautiful, but it ain't my way of finding my senses at work, so I can't do it that way.
To me, it sounds like that kind of music wouldn't be able, well, maybe it could, but tap into somebody's raw, you know, pull at someone's heartstrings, as they say. That kind of music, it's like, I don't know, too formulaic and too perfect and too just pretty, but not just gut-wrenchingly beautiful, say. What do you think about that?
No, I agree with you. And I think that the reason why I maintain an interest in poetry, or indeed any wordsmithing, the idea that words, you know, can be permutated and mixed and constructed to be beautiful, it's just wonderful. That the number of inflections, to fail to give language richness, to me is a terrible betrayal of the gift of speech. I sort of almost pride myself on deeply desiring to be able to do everything expressively in as rich a way as possible. I know there are utilitarian things where you're simply wanting something, you know, could you tell me how to find the post office? It's not exactly poetry. Neither is it if you say, well, you know, rainbows are lovely. It's a bit simple. But when somebody says, my heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky, that's poetry. And when you say, well, you know, autumn's a bit foggy, it ain't as good as season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend with the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load and bless the vines which round the thatch eaves run. My God, that's composing, that's music.